Silly me with the logic. How can we have a federal national holiday called Juneteenth when we have 2.5 million people who are still doing slave labor? The 13th Amendment was passed by Abraham Lincoln after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order that freed slaves. Lincoln made a deal with slave owners and said, it'll have 2 lines. It'll say, slavery's abolished unless you're convicted of a crime. Two million people who are slaves in America. And then people out here are gonna celebrate Juneteenth? Is that like having legal marijuana as people are rotting in cages for marijuana? Sorry, I hate to be logical here, but how can you celebrate Juneteenth when we have slaves in America? It's up to young people to change this world. I will be dead by the time you change the world. In a case called Pace versus Alabama in 1883, this criminalized interracial relationships. In 1884, 160 white people were lynched, the most on record by the NAACP. Pace versus Alabama that happened in 1883 was not overturned until 1967 in a case called Loving versus Virginia. You got the ball, Gen Z. You got the ball. You got to make these guys electable. Plessy versus Ferguson passed in 1896, took 58 years to overturn. You will live your lifetime before you see change because Plessy was not overruled until Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Gen Z, you got the ball. Are you listening to me? Tyranny is afoot. We didn't elect senators until the 17th Amendment, and now we elect them. We need to make the Supreme Court electable. Gen Z, you got the ball. It's up to you. Earl Warren freed blacks on May 17, 1954, in a case called Brown versus Board of Education. Now, you may think of Earl Warren as some great humanitarian. Not at all, not even close. He was a prison state, police state, Freemason who had won every election he'd ever gone out for. And what he did in 1944 in a case called Korematsu versus United States, in 1942, Earl Warren convinced FDR to lock up 100,000 Japanese because of World War II. When Korematsu sued, he lost because FDR had appointed 7 Supreme Court justices, and they said it wasn't racist at all. So, why did Earl Warren desegregate in 1954? Because he was an authoritarian and he had no idea what was going on in the black community. At restaurants, bars, clubs, they still had black establishments, and Earl Warren didn't know what was going on in the schools. What were they saying to the schools? Were they getting the same indoctrination that the white kids are? So Earl Warren desegregated because he's an authoritarian, and so that he could arrest blacks and create the penal system we have today. Earl Warren, I want you to read the 3 police commissions, the 3 commissions on policing. This one is the 1994 Mullen Commission. This one talks about the code of silence, where police won't tell anything about any other cop, and it talks about the Back the Blue slogan that was created by an advertising agency. Because the Mullen Commission was so atrocious and said how horrible police are, that they're completely lawless, they're violent, they're gang members, they're either the head of every organized gang or they're the muscle for the organized gang. That's in the Mullen. The Wickersham Commission came out in 1929, and this is about prohibition, how the police are either, again, the head of the alcohol gang or the gang itself. Olmsted versus United States, I believe, was 1927, and in that case, Roy Olmsted was convicted for bootlegging. He was a Seattle police lieutenant. Have you ever heard about that before? And then this is the Knapp Commission in 1974. This says police are completely lawless. I challenge you to read them. 3 police commissions. If you don't have them, I got them. I want you to read the 3. Some fascinating things happened as I built the wall and the history of institutional racism in our country. Take a look at the lynching chart. Here's the lynching chart over here. Now, I found more lynchings than the NAACP lists. However, the NAACP starts in 1882 and it ends in about 1965. Can you see the chart? You see it right here? Now, on the other side is the prison chart. The prison chart takes off, guess when? Terry v. Ohio, right there. That's when it takes off. And take a look at the shape of it. Look at the shape of the prison chart. Incredible. If I took a pin and I magically could take a pin and stick it right there on the lynching chart, and I could make it swing around. I could do it in Photoshop. It would be the same shape as the prison chart. It would be the same shape. Do you see that? I didn't do that. Those are just statistics. When the lynchings end, the prison system begins. Some fascinating. We talked about the lynching chart and how it ends in about 1964, 1965. What happens? How come the lynchings in Alabama come to an end? It was because of a white conservative. This man right here is named Dr. T.C. Donald. He put his name in the Annister Star, along with 200 other white men and a handful of prominent black leaders in the community. And the lynchings came to an end. T.C. Donald said, "I'm done with it. I'm gonna put up $20,000 to find out who the killer of Willie Brewster was." They found Darren Strange and they arrested him. Darren Strange was the first white man ever found guilty of killing a black man in America. The very first one. He never served any prison time. He was released on appeal and then shot in the face by his mechanic a few months later in another dispute. He was a real peach. Conservatives. Dr. T.C. Donald put his name in the paper and things changed. We talked about, if you're going to talk about reparations, you have to be specific to the reasons why reparations are owed. Here's why. In 1926, in a case called Corrigan versus Buckley, the unelected tyrannical Supreme Court upheld racial restrictive covenants. What are the results of that? What that means is that you couldn't sell your house to a black person. As you know, generational wealth is typically handed down through the house in the family. Corrigan versus Buckley, white folks bought houses. Their grandparents passed it down to their kids, down to their kids. It happens again, it repeats about 1950 or so. The kids come back from college, they buy a house. Then they share with their kids. The money from the house transfers to the next generation. Then we get to the 60s and what happens? There's an explosion in America. Because blacks have been cut out of generational wealth, well, since the beginning, but for 4 decades since the Supreme Tyranny passed Corrigan versus Buckley. You have to be specific when you talk about reparations as to the reasons why, and it's Corrigan versus Buckley.